They said the oil would last forever, and that the coal was endless. And for a while it felt that way, but deep in the quiet plains of Denmark, a very different idea was taking root, one that would turn into a revolution. This is the story of how Europe rekindled its relationship with the wind and rewrote the future of energy. It was the 1970s when the world was rattled by oil crises. Twice in one decade, the taps ran dry, or so it seemed. Gasoline prices soared, nations scrambled to regain control. And in Denmark, people remembered the wind. You see, Denmark already had a quiet history with wind power. Small farms had relied on windmills for decades to pump water and grind grain. But now, engineers and farmers alike began to dream bigger. In 1978, a carpenter named Henrik Stiesdal, just 19 years old, built a wind turbine in his parents' backyard. He had no formal training, just sketches and an obsession. That home-built machine turned heads. A few years later, it would be adapted and mass-produced by Vestas, a company that would become a global wind power titan. And it wasn't just Denmark. Germany, battered by both oil crises and its own environmental awakening, began experimenting with wind in the 1980s. They called it Energiewende, or energy transition. It wasn't popular at first. Critics laughed. The turbines were too small, too expensive, too ugly, but supporters didn't flinch. They believed in energy without borders and without pollution, and most importantly, without dependence. By the 1990s, wind farms began dotting the European landscape. Fields of slowly turning blades emerged from northern Germany to the flat coasts of the Netherlands. These weren't just machines, they were statements. That the energy could be local again, that the wind, once ignored, was back in business. Governments got on board, subsidies flowed, grid integration improved, and one by one, countries built the foundation for what would become the world's fastest-growing renewable energy sector. By the early 2000s, Europe had more wind turbines than the rest of the world combined. And what about Denmark? They weren't just building turbines, they were powering their homes with them. By 2020, over 40% of Denmark's electricity came from wind. That's not a dream, that's rather a design. It didn't happen overnight, of course. There were failures, prototypes that crumbled, blades that shattered. There were protests, policy fights, doubts. But in the end, something rare happened. Persistence won. Today, when you see a wind farm stretching across the European countryside, you're not just looking at technology. You're looking at legacy, at the courage to try something different and keep trying until you succeed. Because Europe didn't just invent modern wind power, they proved it could work. That was the wind who never changed, but we did instead. And somewhere between the storm and the silence, we learned to listen.